email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Kevin Armstrong, speaker, disruptor, leader of the Interdependent Training Group, and author of The Miracle Manager. We resumed the conversation with his realization that you can't be powerful unless you're willing to be vulnerable. In the book, you also referenced the Brené Brown TED Talk on vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And ever since I've seen that TED Talk, I've been trying to get her on the podcast. I've not been successful. So
good luck.
She's too big for us. But anyway, for those that haven't seen it, what was the key takeaway that resonated with you, and why do you show it to so many of your clients?
So 13 or 14 years ago, I guess, this person was on me to take this workshop, and they have really good trained facilitators, and it's a self-help workshop, and I thought, man, I've been to a million of these things. So I go to sit in on it, and the facilitator the first day said, "You can't. This is 2008. You can't be truly powerful unless you're willing to be vulnerable." And I was like, "Are you kidding me? That makes no sense whatsoever. You're a dead man if you're trying to get people to do something, and you show that you're not confident or you're weak." And that whole and one of the things that Brené Brown, since that video, when I watched it in 2010, it's got less views, but the next one on shame that she did for the full TED audience, she did TED Houston. That was the first one that's got 40 million views. The second one was on shame, and she talks about gender, and that really hits home for me as a man. Because we have been so programmed from the day we're born. I mean, they talk about gender neutrality today. Good luck with that. Because you watch the way we pick up a newborn baby. If it's a boy, we grab him with our hands and go, "Look at this little guy," and we're shaking him and we're holding him firmly. And then you pick up a little girl baby and you're sort of holding her carefully and you're rocking her back and forth and you're going, "Oh, isn't she sweet?" Right? So from day one, men are programmed that vulnerability is weakness, period.
Right.
And we have to get over that because, like I said, when you're trying to connect with somebody, if you go up to them and say, "Hey, you did this wrong and here's what you need to do better," or Steve Jobs, that wasn't really a vegetarian meal, try harder next time,
Yeah.
That's not how we relate to people. How we relate to people are when people come in and go, "Wow, like you should have seen how bad I did this." The whole problem with video today is it's all perfection. We watch these golfers. I'm a golfer, and you watch these professionals, and you didn't see them when they first picked up a club. You didn't see them smashing the ball the way you do, and as a beginner. We just see perfection and we wonder why we can't get there. We don't realize the blood, sweat, and tears that it takes to get there, right? So, I heard this in 2008. Then in 2010, I heard Brené Brown, and then it all came together that you can't be powerful unless you're willing to be vulnerable. I often ask the question now, if you could go back to when you're a teenager and you can only take one piece of information with you that you know today, what would you take? And of course, when I ask this in an audience, people say Bitcoin. But I say, no, not monetary. If you could take one piece of information that's really helped you in your life, and for me, it's a no-brainer. I can answer that question in a second. The fact that we're all flawed. We are all flawed. We all have our dark closets. We are all fighting with something. We all have things we're ashamed of, or as Brené Brown says, or else you're a sociopath, and you think you don't, right?
Right.
But and so to really get real with ourselves, we go back to self-awareness, to get real with ourselves and understand ourselves. And if I'm right, the way to be a great manager or coach is to be able to connect with people. You make people feel so safe when you come across like that and just say, "Hey, we're all flawed. We all make mistakes. We're all dealing with this stuff. Let's talk about it."
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Many of us are raised to equate vulnerability with weakness, and so
Yeah.
is the way to overcome that is to realize we're all flawed. Is that really the key?
I screwed up. 3 words. That's all you need, right? You want to stop a controversy, just say, hey, I made a mistake. And instead of saying, sorry, just say, can you forgive me? If
Right.
the person says no, now you have some work to do in a relationship because you've said I'm sorry too many times, right? But
Well, you actually talk about tone in the book as well, which is a key thing for me, because you can say, can you forgive me in a negative way, right? I screwed up. Can you forgive me? And not really mean it, right? And people can read the snark. They can read the tone.
yeah.
So it's really about meaning, can you forgive me? And you actually give the story in the book, I think, of making a rule about you have a new couch and nobody can eat on the couch, and then
I get caught eating on
your
it.
son, and so you say, you know what, you're right, I made a mistake. Can you forgive me? And I'm assuming that wasn't snarkily said, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
we're all subject to making mistakes. Nobody's perfect. So one of the things you said is that the number one role of a man coach is to remove barriers. Now, can you elaborate on that one a little bit?
Oh, sure. The big secret in being a great manager or coach is you want people to become independent. You're challenging them to become independent. And the only way that you can get people to be independent is to reject their dependence. It feels good to be dependent on. It feels good to have the answers when people ask the questions. But every time you answer a question or help somebody, that person's not growing. The way they grow is, like if I come to you and say, hey, how would you do this? And you say, oh, I would do this, this, and this. That's great. Now I know how to do it. Was there a better way? We'll never know because that was just your way, right? And so what managers do is they reject the dependence. And so, when someone comes to them, they say, hey, how would you do this? You go, what would you do if I wasn't here? And if the person says, I don't know, I say, can you close the door and sit down for a second? I need to talk to you. I don't pay you for me to think. And the great thing about Google is there's no excuse now not to have some idea of how to do it. You can look up on YouTube and you can get the answer to almost how to break into your car, how to hotwire your car, whatever you want to know is on YouTube, right?
Yeah, sure.
So to go to your boss and say, I don't know. And so that was something I had a mentor as a president when I was a vice president of a company, and I learned this from him. It's just what would you do if I wasn't here? And reject that dependence. See, what happens is you cannot become independent until the person you're dependent on rejects the dependence. We will breastfeed until we're embarrassed to bring our friends home from high school, unless our mother rejects the dependence and weans us, right? So from that point forward, the only thing we're born naturally motivated to do is to suck. And then everything from that point forward, that's why babies are in such big trouble if they suck for milk and they don't get it, right? They stop sucking. That was the only thing we were born motivated to do. Everything else is dependence, and we became dependent by having that dependence rejected.
Right. Now, you also write that people choose their attitudes. You can't change another person's attitude. You can only change your own.
Right.
Why is that so important for us to understand?
Well, first of all, an attitude's the way you think. We should get that clear, right? It's just the way you think. And it's based on and our attitude is just based on all of our subconscious files, our emotional files from the day we were born. That with our conscious thinking mixed together determines how we respond. And so when you're saying to somebody, I don't like your attitude, you're saying, I don't like the way you think, because an attitude is just the way a person thinks. That's all it is. And actually, I was at a Forbes book event in Charleston 3 years ago, and this Marine raised his hand. He goes, we change attitudes in the Marines. And I said, no, you don't. You just change the way people behave, but you don't change their attitude. You don't change the way they think, and in fact, you do a lot of damage, which has been documented and everything else. You go on about that. But so you can't change an attitude. And then negative energy. I'm a real energy person, have been since Bob Proctor. I ran into him 35 years ago. So I've been into this energy thing, right? You can't change, there's positive and there's negative energy. What's more powerful, positive or negative energy?
I want to say positive, but I'd probably say negative.
Right. Well, if you talk to any electrical engineer, they'll verify it's negative. It's 10 times more powerful, right? So if you have 10 positive people on your team and a negative person comes on the team, what just happened to the energy of that team? Neutralized.
Out. Yeah.
It's now neutralized. So you do have a responsibility to let that person know that their attitude is not going to survive in this culture. You need to have that conversation. You need to document it. You need to have another conversation. You need to document it. But at the end of the day, you cannot change another person's attitude. I always loved when I'm speaking on this, I say, okay, write down these 2 rules, because if I want you to take away anything from this podcast or from any presentation I do, it's the 2 rules of attitude. Number 1, you cannot change another person's attitude. They can only change it. You can create the environment. You can let them know that it's not working, and you should do that in writing and verbally, but you cannot change another person's attitude. Rule number 2, the closer the person is to you, or the more important they are to you, the more you want to ignore rule number 1. So if you're an organization, you have Harry, and Harry's your top salesperson, and Harry outsells the other 5 salespeople put together, but Harry is a bad behaved, bad attitude person. Makes a receptionist cry. He yells at people. He throws things around. He lies to clients. He lies to the operations that have to fulfill sales orders. He's just a walking nightmare, but he's really good at sales. He was responsible for, half of your profit last year. And so I get these calls from business owners, what can we do to change Harry's attitude? And I go, what part did you miss on the 2 things I just said, right? Number 1, you can't change an attitude. Number 2, the closer the person is to you, the more you want to ignore rule number 1. The closer or the more important they are to you. Right. So if you're married to somebody and you've had the conversations and put it in writing in terms of your critical expectations, you have a choice to make. Either live in that hell for the rest of your life or do something about it, because the person's not going to change their attitude.
Right. We want them to, right?
Oh,
it doesn't happen. If I could just change this one thing, that'd be perfect. And
exactly
change that one thing.
Yeah.
Now, you use an acronym in the book, GWC. What does that stand for?
That's an EOS worldwide acronym. Gets it, wants it, and has the capacity. The soft skills, whether they're in line with your core values or not, there's a tool for that. And then when you look at your accountability chart, all the roles and responsibilities of people that fit into those roles and responsibilities, do they get their jobs so they have a natural talent? Do they want to be there? They're not just there for the paycheck, or they're there because their spouse wants them to have a job. They're there because they want to be there. And the capacity, which is where I pick up 2 pens in left hand and another 2 pens in the right hand. And I say, Clint, what's 2 plus 2? And you say 3. I say, okay, Clint, here's 2 pens. Here's another 2 pens. I put them together. How many do I have? That's 4. All right. So that's 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? Yeah. And then I come in the next day and I go, hey, Clint, what's 2 plus 2? And you say 3. We have a capacity problem. And a lot of people say, well, what happened? How come Clint lasted so long with his company? Well, because the company's growing and we've outgrown his capacity. So gets it, wants it, and capacity are really the only 3 things you have to run in terms of hard skill performance. We just need to make sure that you get it, you want it, and you have the capacity. And if we have check marks for all 3, we're good.
Now, are those all 3 things that can't be taught, or can some of that be learned?
Gets it, can't be taught. Natural talent. You can let a person know, like, Kev, when you're waiting on those tables, make eye contact, because you can tell in the faces if everybody's happy or if they need to see you, right? So you go, oh, yeah. Well, I might be the most empathetic person you've ever met, and I can read people like a book. I just never thought about that, right? So you tell me that, but that natural talent of being able to look at people and read them, I don't think can be taught. So gets it is natural talent. That can't be taught. Wants it, it's just whether you want it or not. So we all know what that means. And capacity can be taught. So 2 plus 2 is 4. Yeah, you get it now, Clint? Yeah. Next day I come in and say, okay, Clint, 3 plus 3, and you go 6. Okay, we're on the right track, right? It can be taught. You do have the capacity. You are learning.
Got it. I loved it when you wrote that you learn nothing when you're talking. You can only learn when you're listening. And I often say the listening is one of the most important components of being a good conversationalist. And I think that's missed by so many people, that they assume a conversation is all about talking, when I think the majority of it's really about listening.
Yeah, when I meet with peer boards, I have a very proven process in terms of they report out on their business. And nobody's allowed to talk. We have to listen. Okay, so we take notes. That forces you to listen. And then we have questions and answers. So we can ask the business owner all sorts of questions about their report and get the answers. And then we have a go around, and we all tell the business owner what we're seeing and hearing and what we think that he or she should do. And the reason that the business owner is not allowed to talk in that third phase, because, and I can relate to this, you start talking to me and giving me a suggestion of what I should do about the book or, in my life. And you're 3 sentences in and I'm already thinking about how I'm going to rebut this because you're wrong, right? Well, if I'm not allowed to talk and I got a pen and a paper, I'm just allowed to take notes. And what I'm listening for is, as we go through the 9 or 10 business owners, are all of them, is there a common theme in terms of the message? Because if there is, you better be listening. If you have a consensus, you're probably going in the wrong direction. And 21 years of working with a group of people, when somebody they all tell you to do something and you don't do it, you've been wrong. If I go through the minutes of the meeting. So you better be listening when you have a consensus by a group of people that are saying you're going in the wrong direction. Now, that's not always true, probably, when it comes to creative stuff or every new idea was considered blasphemy.
Sure.
Any great new idea, but it's usually pretty good. So, the listening part, even to come up with a process that forces you to listen. I'm terrible. I'd give myself a 4 out of 10 on listening, because I'm already thinking. I'm probably 80% of business owners are ADD. I know I'm ADD because I'm listening to you and I'm just going. Just listen to the way I just answered this question. I went off in about 4 different directions. So I'm a terrible listener in terms of I'm thinking about how I'm going to respond, as opposed to sit back and listen and really listen and hear what the person's saying, right?
Yeah, I think another thing you mentioned there that's important is the pen and paper idea, to take notes. So many people today type on their keyboards, but there have been studies that show that you're a filter for what coming person's saying, and you're typing in it, but you're not really understanding the conversation. So you get much more of an understanding when you actually take notes physically with a pen and paper, because you're not just going to be a stenographer. You're actually listening to what they say, interpreting it, and then writing in shorthand what it is, your take on it is. And so it's much more powerful to take notes with a pen and paper than it is to you may as well just push record on a recorder if they're just going to type it, right?
Yeah.
Well, for me, I don't know if it's because of the age I was raised in or not, but the last book I wrote was done 100% on paper with number 2 pencil.
Yeah.
And then eventually typed up. But I think better when I can write and erase, and I don't think as well personally. I'm sure that's not the same for everybody, but I don't think as well when I'm typing. I like to write it out and scratch it out and then erase. So, yeah. Obviously, your chapter on communication really resonated with me, since the podcast is called The Conversation. You start the chapter with a Charles Dickens quote: "Electric communication will never be a substitute for the face of someone who, with their soul, encourages another person to be brave and true." And man, that really resonated with me. So, what are some of the drawbacks we've actually talked a little bit today about them, but what are some of the drawbacks that you see to electronic or electric communication?
I hope it's not the death of us. That's how serious I think it is. This whole texting and watching people with their spouses having an argument over text,
Yeah.
and that whole thing of where's the tone, where it's the tone that, and you just see people go off. I've got so many examples of this where people you just think a person said something because you missed the tone of it, and it just goes into this whole thing. I get so frustrated when I was working with people and a customer has a complaint and then you start emailing back, and I'm just, pick up the effing phone, get on the phone. Now we got Zoom, we can see their faces. Like, get in front of this person and let's have a conversation, because I think I said it in the book. Have you ever had that happen where you watch this, you're copied on this back and forth between, let's say, a customer and your company, and then you get on the phone and you fix it in like 12 seconds. And it's just going back and forth and back and forth. It's just like, oh my God. And, it's like, I don't know if I said it in the book or not, but I do it in my talks. I just write, either put up a PowerPoint that says nice dress, or I write on the whiteboard, nice dress. And I just say, is this a compliment or is it an insult? And the answer is tone, right? I can go, hey, Susan, nice dress, right? Or I can say, hey, Susan, nice dress, right? Two totally different messages that we can't discern from the written word. And I'm now at a point, this is really important. The last thing I'll say on this, I have concluded, and I want somebody to prove me wrong, you cannot solve a serious issue through the written word. It can only be done through dialogue.
You'll get no argument from me.
Yeah.
I'm a huge proponent of dialogue and conversation. I do think text-based communication is fine for, yes, no kind of questions, but anything that, as you said, requires discussion is better done face-to-face over the phone, but and through some kind of a dialogue.
And that's that's where it's such an easy trap, Clint, because you're 100% right. I mean, it's so efficient to go, hey, Clint, we're meeting at 9:00 tomorrow morning, right? Yes. I mean, instead of me having to phone you and go, hey, Clint, how's it going? How's your day going? Listen, we are meeting that takes like 12 minutes, where a text takes 12 seconds. So to confirm dates, to give you information you need about, directions or those type of things are fantastic. But we just can't do that crossover where there's something negative or critical, where we're not agreeing. The only thing that's going to resolve that, or the best way to resolve that, is through dialogue.
I think people like to be efficient. And so it's efficient for me to say, to send you a text message. It's not efficient for me to walk down the hallway and say, hey, can we talk for a minute, or pick up the phone and call you. But like we just talked about, there are so many things it requires. It's not about efficiency. It's about clear understanding of the message.
It was actually Jim Renahan that corrected me on that, because I used to say good managers get things done through others. And he said, no, good managers get things done efficiently and effectively. It's not good enough to be just efficient. You have to be effective, right? And so efficiently and effectively. And so, like on this conversation, the written word is not effective when it comes to resolving issues.
No, I think of communication as almost like a continuum, where on one end of the scale we have text-based, which is email, text messages, posting on instant messaging, things like that. Then you move up, but they don't have, like you said, they don't have tone. Then you move up to a phone call, which now has tone. I have tone, but I can't see. I get none of the visual cues in your facial expression. Are you leaning back? Are your arms crossed? Is your face red? I get none of that. Then I do Zoom calls, where now I can at least see your face if the camera's on, and I can see that you've squinched your face and you're angry, right? In addition to the tone of the voice, but it's still not as good as we talked about earlier about all the other nonverbal cues that come from face to face. So I do think there is a continuum, and I love the phrase you use: "Quit hiding behind your keyboard."
Yeah.
So face to face is definitely important for this kind of thing.
They quit hiding behind your keyboard too. Make no mistake, I fall into that trap all the time, because it's just easier. It's just easier to write you an email and go, Clint, I didn't agree with what you said. I didn't agree with what you said, right? And here's why. As opposed to phoning you and saying, Clint, can we have a conversation? And then I find out, well, that's not even what you meant. Oh, geez, sorry about that.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's too easy to fall into that trap, right? I want to hide. I think that's the phrase you use is great. I'm hiding behind my keyboard because I don't want to come face to face and confront the issue, which maybe I find that isn't an issue at all, but more than likely it probably is an issue, and I just don't want to confront it. I just want it to go away. And the easiest way to do it is I responded to Kevin. I told him he was being a jerk, and I'm off to the next thing.
Well, one of the key things, critical key things, number one, for a great manager or coach, is the ability to have those tough conversations. And if you read the book Crucial Conversations, really all it is, when you look at the three things you should do, one, the first step is saying, here's what I observe. And two, here's how it makes me feel. And three, here's what I need from you. So if we're having if we're going to enter into a thing where I want to resolve this issue, and I say, Clint, it really bugs me that we start at 9 o'clock in the morning and you come in every day at 9:30. How it makes me feel is I feel like disappointed and I feel frustrated because other people see this and they see this as acceptable. So what I need from you is I need you to come in here at 9 o'clock, right? Now, if I don't email this and we have a conversation, we might not get past what number one does is when I say, Clint, here's what I see. I see you coming in every day at 9:20 or 9:30, and it drives me crazy, right? Here's how it makes me feel. It gives you the opportunity to go, well, Kevin, I don't know if you recall, but when you hired me, I told you I had to get my kids to daycare and I wouldn't get in here until 9:30. And what you don't see is that when you leave at 5 o'clock, I don't leave sometimes till 6:30 at night. And I go, oh, gee, I'm really sorry. We did have that conversation, right? If this was done by email, it could just explode. But because I follow this way of having a crucial conversation, and we don't even get past step one where I realize my assumptions are wrong, and I owe you an apology, right? But that could never be done by email.
No, I totally agree. And Joseph Grenny's book, Crucial Conversations, is so good. I mean, I had him on the podcast last year and highly recommend that book as well.
Wow, yeah. A powerful book. Yeah, I've used that, process for the last 10 years. And if you stick to it, you'll never go wrong. And it's one of the things we procrastinate on. That's why I say it's the number one thing. When Herb Brooks, like the movie Miracle, the one scene that Disney really missed out on, Herb Brooks tried out for the U.S. men's Olympic hockey team as a player, and he got cut because he wasn't good enough. Now, he was close. He was 20. They can only take 20 players. He was the 21st player to get cut, so he has to cut Ralph Cox. And so in the movie, during a practice, he just calls Ralph to his office and cuts him as a 21st player. But that's not what really happened, and Hollywood and Disney missed out on such a great scene because according to Ralph Cox, right at the last minute, seconds, before the celebration dinner, sending the team off to the Olympics, he gets summoned to Herb Brooks' hotel room. When he arrives, Herb can't even make eye contact with him. Herb Brooks is pacing back and forth, looking at the floor, stressed, jugular pumping, face flush. It's actually Ralph Cox that speaks first, and he goes, "It's okay, Herb." 3 words, right? "It's okay, Herb." And Herb looks at him and says, "I am so sorry, Ralph. This is the most difficult decision I've ever had to make in my life." And they sit down, eyeball to eyeball. Herb Brooks goes over all the reasons. And here's the thing that just blows me away. They left with this eternal love and respect for each other. They would have hugged back then, but they shook hands, right? But they left with this eternal love, which I don't get, because you imagine as a young player and you want to play on that hockey team, that Olympic team, and the one person that takes that away, that dream away from you, you leave with this eternal love and respect for each other. And then years later, Ralph Cox, the young player who's not so young anymore, opens up this magazine. He starts reading this article. And the article is with Herb Brooks, and the interview was done just days after the gold medal event. And in the interview, Herb Brooks is asked, "There you are, Herb, the other night. Your team's on the top podium, gold medals around their chest pumped out. Everybody in Lake Placid, no, everybody in America standing at attention with their hand over their chest, singing the national anthem with such pride, because in an era where America needed to win at anything, against the odds, against every single thought or chance that we thought you had, you beat the Russians to attain gold." The other night, when you're sitting there looking at your team up there, what's going through your mind? And I can't even get through this emotionally when I'm speaking in public, right? He says, "I was thinking about Ralph Cox and I was wishing he could be there."
Wow.
Yeah. It's so powerful in terms of that, just the ability to have those crucial conversations. He didn't send Ralph Cox a text. He didn't send him an email. He brought him to his hotel room, and he basically opened up his heart to him and said, "This is the toughest thing I've ever had to do, eyeball to eyeball." And they leave with, and when I talked to Ralph Cox last year, I said, did you know why you were being summoned to his hotel room. And he said, of course, right? Because with great managers and coaches and their ability to have these crucial conversations, everybody in the team knows where they stand. In our business, we call it healthy.
Yeah, you can contrast that. Again, I'm in Atlanta, and we have the football team is Atlanta Falcons, and one of our previous coaches, Bobby Petrino, he quit in the middle of the season, and overnight just left a note in people's lockers. Didn't have that day he said to the owner he was going to stick around to the end of the season, but then just quit overnight. Went to coach University of Arkansas instead. He left it, and so people didn't respect him inside the organization because he just left the note in people's lockers. Didn't call a meeting to say, hey, I'm leaving, and just nothing. Just overnight pulled out of town. So what a different story that is, right?
Yeah.
It's such a common mistake for us to assume our message was received and understood. And that's why it's so important to ask, as you say in the book, what did you just hear me say? And by the way, I'm often disappointed when I ask my 13-year-old son that question because I've had a conversation with he's nodded at all the right times, and I say, okay, what did I just say? And he goes, wait, what? He has no idea because he wasn't really listening, right?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say that it wasn't because he wasn't listening. It might be that you didn't say what you thought you said. And that's the big problem is, in communication. My favorite one is I heard this on the radio a few years ago. There's 30 cows in a field, 28 chickens. How many didn't? And I love doing this with audiences. I'll go, there's 30 cows in a field, 28 chickens. How many didn't? And I go, 10. The answer is 10. And everybody's just squinting at me, looking at me, with a confused face. Everybody. And you go, I can't believe how many people have not heard this, right? Because I heard it on the radio. But nobody gets it. And they're sitting there going, what do you mean 10? I go, there's 30 cows in the field, 28 chickens. How many didn't? Right? 10. Because what you're hearing is 28, the number 28. And so there's 30 cows in the field, 28 chickens. How many didn't? That'd be 2, wouldn't it? And so, I'm going 10. No, it's 10. Because I'm saying 20, 28 chickens, ATE, 28 chickens. And so that's why it's so important when we're having crucial conversations to have the conversation and then put it in writing so that again, we verify exactly what we're saying. So your son might have heard you quite clearly, but you just thought you were saying something that you weren't really saying. And so for us to take responsibility for that as managers or coaches or a mana coach is really important, that we were misinterpreted. And maybe the fault that we were misinterpreted was that, I was bike riding with my wife, Rachel, and in Europe. And there's the 2 Americans giving instructions to this Austrian guy in terms of how they wanted their omelet. Well, the Austrian didn't understand English that well. So the Americans do what we all do when we're not being understood. They get louder, right? No, onions, mushrooms, right? We get louder thinking that's going to solve the problem instead of sitting back and saying, what is it we're saying and why aren't we being, why aren't we being understood? So that's interesting to say where your son, didn't get it. Maybe you didn't give it properly, right? So that's the first thing. Anyway, what was the question again?
I think you've already answered it. So,
okay.
Why is it so important to say, what did you just hear me say?
Yeah, well, and I learned that in marriage counseling. And I want to say that, right? Because, the marriage counselor would ask me that. What did you just hear your wife say? And I'd say, I heard this. And they're both looking at me like, are you out of your mind? That's what you heard?
That's absolutely true. I resonate with that completely.
Yeah.
So I'll keep that in mind the next time I want to accuse my son. But I have noticed that I've got to take the phone out of his hands because it's partially he's not paying any attention to me, right? So I have to make sure he's listening. Let's close with a quote from the book. You can't be committed to and good at growing people if you're focused on yourself. I think it seems like common sense, but so many people don't get it, right? You can't be a narcissist and be a good coach.
Yeah, you can't be empathetic and be a narcissist. One of the things, if you go to managerleader.com, you can take a 12-question assessment and just find out where you land on those type of things. But it's always funny. I'll sit down with a group of people and say, okay, let's talk about the characteristics of a great leader. and then I write manager on the right-hand side. Like, give me all the characteristics of a great manager, and they give me much the same stuff, right? But they start with leader being empathetic. A leader doesn't have, Steve Jobs is not empathetic, right? But as a coach or a manager and ability to connect with people, you have to be empathetic. I am not a great manager because I am a narcissist. And by the way, I don't think narcissist is you are or you're not. I think it's a scale, 0 to 10, let's call it, right? So 0 to 10, I would say maybe I'm a 7. I used to be a 10. And maybe I dropped to a 7 or 6, right? Rachel's probably a 1 or a 2. The person I told you about that I wanted a testimonial from, and she doesn't want to get on Zoom, right? That is probably a 1. And so what definitely we have found is one of the reasons I'm not a good manager or coach is because it's about me. And I don't have any problem saying that. I want my picture on the top of the sales chart. You know,
Right.
Here's the greatest sales person that ever lived. And you know, I realize that's not so important, and that was a big mistake when I thought, you know, in my lifetime. But just get real with yourself. Where do you land? And if you go to, you know, manager or leader.com, you might find out some things about yourself. But it's it definitely is true that narcissism and empathy are on the opposite ends of the spectrum, and they're both. It's not yes or no. They're both scalable, right? And so where do you land? Because you can't be a great manager or coach if you're not empathetic. And you can't be empathetic if you're a narcissist.
Yeah, I know early in my career, the owner of the company would put up the list of who had the best sales and list it all. He was always at the top of the list. And then the one year at our Christmas party, he didn't put the list up, and I found out it's because he wasn't number 1 anymore. So.
Yeah. And bless their hearts. I mean, you know, we need those people on the team. We need those people who are going to knock down walls. But they want to be pat on the back. You know, they can go and do all the top sales and bring those customers in for us. And let's cater to that. Let's not have these people work on their weaknesses.
Well, Kevin, we covered a lot of ground today, but if someone wants to learn more about you, your work, and how to get the book, where can they do that?
Right on. Clint, you know, I really appreciate the time, and I really appreciate the attention. It's funny when you publish a book 3 years ago, and somebody's pulling stuff out of it that you forgot about. It makes me think I better go read it again. I really appreciate that.
No, so if people want to follow you or find out how to work with you, how can they do that, Kevin?
Miracle Manager, themiraclemanager.com. Or if you go to managerleader.com, it'll take you to the website.
And your book's available on Amazon?
And the book's available everywhere. Audible, if you want to listen to me for a few hours, or I'll read it to you. Yeah, or you can go to Amazon, or you can go to our website, or whatever you like.
That's awesome. Kevin, it's great to catch up with you after so many years. Thanks for the conversation.
Hey, appreciate you reaching out. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett. To find out more about Clint, go to projectsuccess.com or pick up Clint's book, The Project Success Method, at amazon.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.